President Catherine Bell stood before the assembled representatives of humanity, with the weight of 7 billion souls pressing down on her shoulders. The emergency session had lasted 3 days, and the arguments had grown more desperate as the Galaxy Council's deadline approached. 10 days remained for humanity to choose their fate, and the decision could no longer be delayed. The president's voice carried across the silent hall as she began the speech that would define the future of the human species. She spoke of Claire Morrison, who had traveled to the stars seeking friendship and understanding, only to die screaming in alien flames. She spoke of the choice between slavery and extinction that the Council had offered as their only options for survival. Bell announced that humanity would reject both paths and choose a third way that their enemies had never considered. If the galaxy wanted to treat humans as a contamination, then humanity would show them what contamination truly meant. The species that had burned their ambassador alive would learn that humans preferred to burn bright rather than fade away under alien rule. Operation Prometheus began immediately, with activation orders sent to every human ship and station across known space. The plan was insane in its scope and impossible in its execution, which made it perfectly suited to a species that had never accepted the word impossible. Admiral Scott Walker took command of the operation from his flagship as humanity prepared for its final gambit. The first phase required every available human vessel to modify their faster-than-light drives into weapons of unimaginable destruction. The same technology that allowed ships to travel between stars could be reversed and focused into beams that would tear holes in space itself. The modifications would leave the ships unable to return home, but that was a sacrifice every crew had volunteered to make. Captain Jennifer Hayes commanded the heavy cruiser New Amsterdam as it prepared for its suicide run against Quantum Node 7 in the Rigel system. She was Lisa Hayes' younger sister and carried the same cold determination that had made her sibling famous. Her crew of 200 volunteers knew they would never see Earth again, but they sang battle songs as they made final preparations. The Quantum Nodes were heavily defended by Council forces that had never faced a serious threat in over 1,000 years. Their weapons were designed to stop conventional attacks by enemy fleets, not kamikaze runs by ships that had been turned into flying bombs. The human vessels would have only seconds to complete their mission before being destroyed. Dr. Carter worked frantically in his laboratory aboard the command ship MONITORING, Quantum Network Traffic, for signs that their plan was working. Each successful attack would weaken the network and create cascading failures that would spread across the galaxy. If enough nodes were destroyed simultaneously, the entire system would collapse like a house of cards. The UFSS Retribution emerged from its hidden construction bays beneath Luna's surface as the first phase of the operation began. The massive vessel was larger than any ship humanity had ever built and carried weapons based on the same physics that powered their faster-than-light drives. Admiral Walker transferred his flag to the Retribution for the final phase of the mission. The ship's captain was Commander Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose family had died in the border wars and who had nothing left to lose except her hatred for those who threatened human freedom. Her crew of 10,000 volunteers represented the best that humanity had to offer, and they all knew that their names would be remembered until the last human drew breath. News of Operation Prometheus spread across human space faster than any government could contain it. On every world, families gathered around communication screens to watch their sons and daughters prepare for suicide missions against impossible odds. Children who had nightmares about burning alive like Claire Morrison now watched their parents choose death over slavery. The first attacks began at precisely noon Earth time, with human ships emerging from faster-than-light travel directly onto target quantum nodes across the galaxy. The crews had seconds to complete their modifications and turn their vessels into bombs before Council defenses could respond. Ship after ship died in brilliant flashes of light that marked the beginning of humanity's revenge. Captain Hayes broadcast Claire Morrison's final words as the New Amsterdam began its attack run against the Rigel node. Her voice carried across the quantum network to every species in the Council as her ship tore through defensive screens that had protected the node for centuries. The explosion that claimed her life and her crew also destroyed a critical link in the network that connected 47 civilizations. Similar attacks erupted across the galaxy as human ships struck quantum nodes in simultaneous suicide runs that overwhelmed Council defenses through sheer determination and sacrifice. Each successful attack weakened the network further and created gaps that spread like cracks in breaking glass. Dr. Carter watched the quantum traffic collapse as humanity's desperate gambit began to succeed. The Galaxy Council's response was swift and overwhelming as millions of ships converged on human space to begin the promised correction, but without their quantum network to coordinate the assault. The vast fleets found themselves operating in isolation without the instant communication that had made them invincible. Individual commanders made conflicting decisions while their forces stumbled over each other in confusion. Admiral Walker activated the Retribution's main weapon as Council fleets entered the Sol system, expecting to find a defenseless human homeworld. Instead, they faced a ship that had been designed for only one purpose, which was to drag their enemies into mutual destruction. The weapon that emerged from the ship's heart was based on the same physics that cracked planets but scaled up beyond anything the universe had ever seen. The beam that erupted from the Retribution tore through space itself and struck the Council fleet's command ship with the force of a dying star. The explosion consumed hundreds of alien vessels and sent shockwaves across the system that shattered planets and boiled away atmospheres. Earth died in that moment, but so did the heart of the Galaxy Council's military power. Across human space, similar weapons activated aboard ships that had been hidden in asteroid belts and gas giant clouds for years. Each blast claimed human worlds, along with Council fleets, but the message was clear to every species in the galaxy. Humanity had chosen annihilation over appeasement, and would drag their murderers into the dark with them. The war that followed lasted for months as isolated Council forces tried to complete their mission of human extinction while cut off from central command. But humanity's sacrifice had broken the spirit of civilizations that had never faced an enemy willing to die for freedom. Species after species withdrew from the conflict as they realized that victory against humans meant universal destruction. The galaxy would remember Claire Morrison's name and the species that had preferred to burn rather than kneel to alien masters. In the end, both sides were consumed by the fires they had lit, but humanity's final message echoed across the stars long after the last human ship went dark. Some things were worth dying for, and freedom was one of them. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the priority alert came through the ship's communication system. The red light flashed 3 times, which meant only one thing: direct message from Federation headquarters on Centauri Prime. Jake set down his cup and walked to the bridge of the UES Discovery, his boots echoing in the empty corridors. Most of his crew was still asleep, enjoying the quiet time between star systems. The message beacon was already waiting when Jake reached his command chair. He pressed the activation key and watched as the holographic seal of the Galactic Federation appeared in front of him. What came next made his blood run cold. The message was not from the usual diplomatic channels or trade coordination office. It came directly from the High Council chamber itself. "Attention all human vessels and installations," the message began, in the flat, emotionless tone of the Federation's translation system. By official decree of the Galactic Council, voted and passed by a margin of 847 to 1. All human presence in Federation space is hereby declared unwelcome. Humanity is granted exactly 1 standard galactic year to withdraw all personnel, vessels, and installations from civilized space. Failure to comply will result in corrective measures. Jake played the message 3 more times, hoping he had misunderstood something. 847 to 1. That meant almost every single species in the known galaxy had voted against humanity. Only one voice had spoken for them, and Jake knew, without checking, who that had been. Admiral Lisa Campbell, Earth's senior representative to the Federation Council, had probably cast that lone dissenting vote. The captain activated his ship's long-range transmitter and sent an emergency signal back to Earth. Within 6 hours, every human ship, station, and colony in the galaxy would receive the same message. Jake Morrison had been exploring space for 15 years, and he had never seen anything like this in Federation history. Species joined the Federation, or they were ignored by it. Nobody got exiled. Back on Earth, President Kevin Walsh was in the middle of a budget meeting when his chief of staff burst into the room. The man's face was white as paper, and he was holding a datapad that shook in his hands. Kevin dismissed the other officials and listened as his aide read the exile decree word for word. When the man finished, Kevin sat in silence for a full minute. "Get me Admiral Campbell on the emergency channel," Kevin finally said, "and call an emergency session of the World Assembly. Every representative, every senator, every delegate. I want them all in New Geneva within 12 hours. Admiral Lisa Campbell was still in the council chamber on Centauri Prime when the Earth signal reached her. She had been arguing with Federation officials for 3 hours since the vote, trying to understand what had happened. The Zephyrian delegate kept repeating the same accusations. Humans were too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous for peaceful coexistence. The Altarian representative, whose species humanity had saved from extinction just 20 years ago, would not even look at her. "You must understand," the insectoid ambassador Catherine of the Cylani explained through his translator device. "Your species frightens others. The way you fight, the way you never surrender, the way you turn everything into a weapon." Many council members wanted immediate action rather than this warning period. Lisa Campbell had served in the Federation for 30 years. She had negotiated trade agreements, prevented 2 wars, and helped establish the colony protection protocols that kept dozens of species safe from pirates and raiders. Now she was being told that humanity was too dangerous to exist alongside peaceful civilizations. "What evidence do you have?" Lisa asked the assembled delegates. "Show me one unprovoked attack by human forces. Show me one broken treaty, one violated agreement, one act of aggression that justifies this decision." The hegemony representative, a tall reptilian creature with scarred skin, stood up from his seat. "The evidence is in your nature," he said in perfect human English. "You have been in space for less than 4 centuries, yet you have military technology that rivals species who have been spacefaring for millennia. You build weapons into cargo ships. You turn mining equipment into artillery. You teach your children about war as if it were a science." Lisa wanted to argue, but she knew the delegate was not entirely wrong. Humans did have a talent for military innovation that made other species nervous. What she could not understand was why this talent suddenly made them unwelcome when it had been useful for so long. On Earth, President Kevin Walsh stood before the World Assembly in the Great Hall of New Geneva. Representatives from every nation and every major colony had gathered to hear his response to the Galactic Exile decree. The hall was completely silent as Kevin walked to the podium and activated the global broadcast system. "Fellow humans," Kevin began, his voice carrying to every corner of human space. "Today we received a message that will define our species for generations to come. The galaxy has decided that we are unwelcome. They have given us 1 year to abandon everything we have built among the stars and return to Earth like beaten dogs." Kevin paused and looked around the assembly hall. Every face was turned toward him, waiting for his response. Behind the president, the Great Seal of the United Earth Government hung on the wall, a symbol of human unity that had taken centuries to achieve. "I have a simple response to this ultimatum," Kevin continued. "We will not comply. We built half the trade routes they use every day. We stopped 3 interstellar wars that would have consumed entire sectors. We saved the Altarians from the plague that nearly destroyed their homeworld. We have earned our place in this galaxy through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. No vote, no matter how overwhelming, will force us to abandon what is rightfully ours. The assembly erupted in applause, but not everyone was convinced. Dr. Amy Rodriguez, Earth's leading expert on xenobiology and Federation politics, stood up in the gallery and waited for the noise to die down. When the hall was quiet again, she spoke in a clear, firm voice. Mr. President, I have studied Federation politics for 30 years. I know these species better than almost any other human alive. They are not bluffing. The Federation has technology that can sterilize entire star systems. They have weapons that can crack planets like eggs. If we ignore this decree, they will make us pay a price that our species may not survive. Dr. Rodriguez had seen Federation military demonstrations during her research trips to various homeworlds. She had watched Zephyrian warships reduce asteroids to cosmic dust with weapons that humans barely understood. She had studied hegemony battle tactics that could eliminate resistance across entire sectors in a matter of days. The Federation species might be peaceful most of the time, but they had survived in space for thousands of years, because they knew how to eliminate threats when necessary. President Kevin Walsh listened to Dr. Rodriguez's warning, then turned back to the assembly. Fear has never been a good advisor for humanity, he said. We did not leave Earth because space was safe. We did not build colonies because it was easy. We did not join the Federation because we were guaranteed success. We did all of these things because we refuse to be limited by what others think is possible. In the depths of space, Commander Ryan Torres received the President's speech through his ship's communication array. Ryan commanded Earth's Deep Space Defense Force, a collection of patrol vessels and defense platforms that protected human shipping lanes from pirates and raiders. He had been expecting something like this exile decree for months. Ever since Federation inspectors had started asking detailed questions about human military capabilities, Ryan activated his personal communication device and sent a coded message to his fellow officers throughout human space. The message was simple: begin preparing contingency plans for extended operations without Federation support. Commander Torres had been a soldier long enough to recognize the signs of coming conflicts, and he suspected that humanity's reputation for military innovation was exactly what had made the other species nervous enough to vote for exile. As the day ended on Earth and in human colonies throughout the galaxy, the species that had dominated space for 4 centuries prepared to face the greatest challenge in their history. The galaxy had voted to exile them, expecting humans to quietly disappear into the darkness between stars. Instead, humanity had chosen defiance over diplomacy, pride over pragmatism, and resistance over retreat. The countdown to war had begun, though few people realized it yet. 6 months had passed since the exile decree, and humanity showed no signs of backing down. Captain Jake Morrison guided his ship through the asteroid field near Vega, where he had discovered something that made his heart race with both pride and worry. Hidden among the floating rocks was the largest mining operation he had ever seen, with dozens of human vessels extracting precious metals and rare elements at an incredible pace. The operation was run by Pete Jackson, a tough mining foreman who had been working asteroids for 20 years. Pete's crew had turned what should have been a simple extraction site into something that looked more like a military base. Defense platforms floated between the larger asteroids, and modified mining ships patrolled the outer edges of the field. When Jake's ship approached, 3 armed vessels immediately moved to intercept him. "This is Pete Jackson speaking for Vega Mining Collective," came the transmission. "State your business, or move along. We don't have time for Federation inspectors or Earth bureaucrats." Jake identified himself and requested permission to dock with the main platform. Pete granted it, but only after running a full security scan on the Discovery. When Jake finally met the mining foreman face to face, He understood why the man had become something of a legend among asteroid workers. Pete Jackson was built like an old Earth bulldozer, with arms like steel cables and hands that could crush rocks without tools. Federation sent another inspection team last week, Pete told Jake, as they walked through the mining platform. Told them the same thing I told the others. This asteroid field is sovereign human territory now, and they can go inspect their own people if they want something to do. Jake looked around at the operation and realized that Pete had essentially declared independence from both Earth and the Federation. The miners were extracting materials that could build hundreds of ships, and they were doing it with an efficiency that made Federation mining operations look like children playing with toys. More importantly, they were doing it with complete defiance of the Exile decree. What happens when they send warships instead of inspectors? Jake asked. Pete grinned and pointed to a modified mining laser that was aimed at the space between two large asteroids. Then we show them what happens when you try to take something away from humans who don't want to give it up. Back on Earth, General Carol Bennett was overseeing the most massive military buildup in human history. Shipyards that had been building exploration vessels and cargo haulers were now producing warships as fast as they could manage. The designs were unlike anything the Federation had ever seen, combining salvaged alien technology with human engineering in ways that other species considered both brilliant and barbaric. Carol walked through the construction Bay of Luna shipyard, watching workers install weapon systems that violated at least 6 Federation treaties on acceptable warfare methods. The ships being built were not designed to explore or trade. They were designed to fight and win against enemies with superior numbers and technology. Every vessel that rolled out of the shipyards carried enough firepower to level a small city, and they were being produced at a rate that amazed even Carol herself. The Federation species have been peaceful for so long that they have forgotten what real warfare looks like, Carol explained to her staff during their daily briefing. They fight with rules and protocols and gentlemen's agreements. We fight to survive, and that gives us an advantage they cannot understand. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had been trying to change minds for months, but nobody wanted to listen to her warnings anymore. She stood before the World Security Council one more time, presenting intercepted communications that showed Federation fleets gathering near human space. The evidence was overwhelming. Massive battle groups from the Zephyrian Empire, Hegemony, strike forces, and even ships from peaceful species that had never been involved in warfare before. They are not bluffing, Dr. Rodriguez said, for what felt like the 100th time. The Zephyrian Empire alone has enough firepower to destroy every human colony in space. The Hegemony has weapons that can crack planets. The peaceful species are so terrified of us that they are willing to support military action. We are facing the combined might of the entire galaxy, and we are choosing to fight instead of finding a diplomatic solution. Senator Nick Palmer, who had become the leading voice for human resistance, stood up from his chair and addressed Dr. Rodriguez directly. Doctor, your expertise in alien biology is respected by everyone in this room. But you are asking us to abandon everything we have built because you are afraid of alien weapons. Humans did not become a spacefaring species by running away from superior technology. We became spacefaring by finding ways to overcome it. Dr. Rodriguez wanted to scream at the politicians, but she knew it would not change anything. Fear was driving both sides now. The Federation species were afraid of what humans might become if they continued to grow in power and influence. Humans were afraid of what would happen if they showed weakness to species that had already voted to exile them. Both sides were preparing for a war that nobody really wanted, but that seemed impossible to avoid. On the remote colony of New Dakota, Ben Clark was teaching farmers and shopkeepers how to fight like soldiers. Ben had been a farmer himself until the exile decree arrived, but he remembered the stories his grandfather had told him about ancient wars on Earth. Now he was sharing those lessons with anyone willing to listen, turning peaceful colonists into Guerrilla fighters who could disappear into the countryside and strike at enemies who thought they had won. The Federation species fight like they expect their enemies to follow rules. Ben explained to a group of colonists who were learning to use hunting rifles as sniper weapons. They announce their attacks. They give warnings. They try to minimize casualties. That makes them predictable. Predictable enemies are dead enemies. Ben's wife, Helen, was a nurse who had turned the local hospital into a field medical center that could treat combat injuries. She had been stockpiling medical supplies and training civilians in battlefield medicine, preparing for injuries that she hoped would never come. Helen knew that her husband was teaching people to fight, but she also knew that someone would need to put them back together when the fighting started. The Federation made one final attempt at diplomacy when they sent Ambassador Catherine of the peaceful Ceylani to meet with President Kevin Walsh. The insectoid diplomat arrived at the rebuilt Pentagon with a small escort and a message that was both a warning and a plea. Catherine had been one of the few voices in the Federation Council that had argued against the Exile decree, believing that humanity could be reasoned with if the right approach was used. "Your species fascinates and terrifies us in equal measure," Catherine explained through his translation device as he sat across from President Walsh in the secure conference room. "We have studied your history, your wars, your incredible ability to adapt and overcome. That ability is exactly what makes other species believe you are too dangerous to coexist with." President Walsh listened carefully to the ambassador's words, but his response was the same as it had been for months. "Ambassador, humanity has never started a war with any Federation species. We have honored every treaty, respected every boundary, and contributed more to galactic stability than most species twice our age. If the Federation wants to exile us based on fear of what we might do rather than evidence of what we have done, then the Federation is not the peaceful alliance it claims to be." Catherine tried one more time to make the human leader understand the consequences of continued defiance. "President Walsh, there are voices in the Council that advocate for immediate military action rather than exile. Some believe that humanity should be eliminated completely before you become too powerful to contain. Please reconsider your position before those voices become the majority." The meeting ended without agreement, and Ambassador Catherine returned to Centauri Prime with the news that humanity would not comply with the exile decree. The deadline was now less than 6 months away, and both sides were preparing for a conflict that would reshape the galaxy forever. The Federation had numbers and superior technology, but humans had something that no other species possessed: the absolute refusal to surrender no matter how bad the odds became. As ships moved into position and weapons were prepared across hundreds of star systems, the countdown to war continued with the inevitability of a dying star collapsing into itself. The deadline came and went like a whisper in the void, but the Federation response was anything but quiet. Within hours of the exile period ending, the largest military fleet in galactic history began moving toward human space. 200 ships from 15 different species formed an armada that stretched across several light years. Their combined firepower enough to sterilize entire star systems without breaking formation. Admiral Lisa Campbell found herself in the strangest position of her career. Earth had branded her a traitor for trying to prevent the crisis, while the Federation viewed her as a dangerous human who could not be trusted. Now, she stood on the bridge of the Zephyrian flagship, watching Fleet Commander Vorthok prepare for what he called a simple police action to remove an infestation from civilized space. "Your people have forced this situation," Vorthok told Lisa through his translator device. "We offered exile instead of extinction, and they chose neither. Now they will discover why peaceful species have survived in this galaxy for thousands of years." Lisa had served with many of these species during peaceful times, negotiating treaties and coordinating exploration missions. Seeing them now as enemies preparing to destroy human colonies filled her with a sadness that went deeper than fear. She made one last attempt to open communication channels with the human colonies, hoping to convince them to surrender before the shooting started. The first battle happened at New Jamestown, a farming colony that supplied food to 6 different star systems. Captain Jake Morrison had been ordered to evacuate the colony, but his hastily armed freighter was no match for the Federation battle group that dropped out of hyperspace like avenging angels. Jake watched in horror as weapons he had never seen before began dissolving the colony's defense platforms at the molecular level. "All human personnel have 1 hour to evacuate," came the broadcast from the Federation fleet. "After that time, this world will be sterilized according to galactic health protocols." Jake managed to get most of the colonists onto evacuation ships, but 50,000 people could not be moved in 1 hour. He sent desperate messages to the Federation fleet, begging for more time, promising that the colony would surrender and accept relocation. The response came in the form of energy beams that turned the planet's surface into glass while the evacuation ships were still climbing toward orbit. Back on Earth, General Carol Bennett watched the battle reports with growing rage and determination. The human fleet she had built was outnumbered 10-1, but she had been planning for exactly this situation. Her ships were not designed to fight fair battles against superior numbers. They were designed to hurt the enemy so badly that victory would cost more than defeat. "All ships, this is General Bennett," she broadcast to the human fleet as they prepared for their first major engagement. "The Federation thinks this is a police action to remove an infestation. Show them what happens when the infestation fights back." The human counterattack began with tactics that shocked even experienced Federation military commanders. Instead of forming battle lines and exchanging fire at safe distances, human ships dove straight into Federation formations, like missiles, aimed at the heart of the enemy fleet. Ramming attacks destroyed ships on both sides, while suicide runs by damaged human vessels took out Federation cruisers that had never been touched by enemy fire in centuries of service. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had given up trying to prevent the war, and was now working as a combat medic on the hospital ship Mercy. She treated wounded from both sides, human and alien alike, and began to understand something that terrified her more than any weapon. The alien soldiers she treated were not just physically injured, they were psychologically shattered by fighting humans who refused to surrender, even when logic said they should. "They keep fighting even when they are logically defeated," a wounded Altarian pilot told her through his breathing mask. "We destroyed their ship, killed half their crew, and they still tried to ram us with the wreckage. How do you kill something that refuses to die?" The psychological warfare was unintentional, but devastating. Federation species had been fighting wars with rules and conventions for so long that they had forgotten what combat looked like when one side was willing to do anything to win. Human desperation became a weapon more powerful than any technology, turning every battle into a nightmare that Federation soldiers would remember for the rest of their lives. The turning point came at New Dakota, where Ben Clark had been training civilian militias for months. When the Federation battle group arrived, expecting to find helpless farmers, they instead encountered the most effective guerrilla resistance in galactic history. Ben's people had turned farming equipment into weapons, irrigation tunnels into bunkers, and grain silos into missile launchers that could destroy Starship. The battle for New Dakota lasted 6 weeks, with Federation forces controlling the sky, while humans controlled everything else. Ben led attacks that captured Federation equipment and turned it against its former owners, while his militia fighters disappeared into the countryside only to strike again from unexpected directions. The Federation had expected to pacify the colony in a matter of days, but instead found themselves trapped in a ground war that consumed resources and morale at an alarming rate. Helen Clark worked around the clock in field hospitals that moved every few hours to avoid Federation bombing runs. She treated human resistance fighters and Federation prisoners with equal care, earning the respect of soldiers from both sides. When she was killed by shrapnel from a Federation missile strike, The news spread through both armies like wildfire. The peaceful nurse who had saved hundreds of lives became a symbol of human resilience that demoralized Federation forces more than any military defeat. The war's most shocking moment came when Ben Clark's forces managed to capture an intact Federation cruiser using nothing but improvised weapons and coordinated tactics that should have been impossible. The ship had landed for repairs after being damaged by human fighters, and Ben's militia surrounded it during the night. By dawn, they had taken control of advanced technology that human scientists had been trying to understand for decades. Pete Jackson received word of the captured cruiser while defending his asteroid mining operation against the Third Federation attack in 2 months. The mining foreman had turned Vega into a fortress that no enemy could crack, using modified industrial equipment to destroy Federation ships that had ruled space lanes for centuries. When Federation commanders realized that human miners were more dangerous than their professional soldiers, the psychological impact rippled through the entire invasion fleet. "Send them another battle group," Pete radioed to the retreating Federation ships after his latest victory. "Send them 10 battle groups. We have enough rocks in this asteroid field to bury every ship in your fleet, and enough humans to throw those rocks by hand if we have to." Admiral Lisa Campbell watched the war reports from her prison cell on the Zephyrian flagship, where she had been confined after trying to negotiate a ceasefire. The conflict that was supposed to last weeks had dragged on for 2 years, with human resistance growing stronger instead of weaker. Federation casualties were mounting, not just from combat losses, but from psychological breakdowns as soldiers refused to fight an enemy that seemed immune to fear. The propaganda war was turning against the Federation as footage leaked of humans fighting impossible odds and sometimes winning through pure determination. Species that had voted for Exile began to question whether humanity was really the threat they had been told to fear. Some Federation worlds started refusing to send their young people to fight in what was being called the human meat grinder, while others began secretly negotiating with human representatives about ending the conflict. As the 3rd year of fighting began, both sides were exhausted, but neither was willing to surrender. The Federation had superior technology and numbers, but they were discovering that some enemies could not be defeated by conventional warfare. Humanity had lost most of their colonies and billions of their people, but they had proven something that changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Fear was a weapon that worked in both directions, and humans had become very good at using it. 3 years into the war, humanity was losing every battle but winning something far more important: the fear and respect of an entire galaxy. Federation recruitment centers across dozens of worlds reported the same problem. Young soldiers were refusing deployment to human space, calling it a death sentence disguised as military service. The propaganda that had once painted humans as dangerous aggressors now worked against the Federation, as their own people began to question why they were fighting a war that seemed to have no end. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, no longer the simple exploration vessel he had commanded before the war. The Discovery had been rebuilt 3 times, each version more heavily armed than the last. Jake himself had been promoted to Admiral, leading a fleet of captured Federation vessels that had been retrofitted with human weapons and crewed by survivors from destroyed colonies. His current mission was perhaps the most desperate gamble in human military history. Intelligence reports suggested that the Federation's main supply depot was located in the Kepler system, a heavily defended stronghold that coordinated the movement of weapons and supplies to enemy fleets throughout the war zone. Jake's fleet of 12 ships was tasked with destroying a facility that was protected by 50 Federation warships and enough firepower to level a planet. "Admiral, we have visual contact with the depot," reported his communications officer, a young woman named Sarah, who had been a colonist on New Jamestown before the war turned her into a soldier. "Federation defenses are exactly where intelligence said they would be. This is going to cost us everything." Jake nodded grimly and opened communications to his entire fleet. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. We all know what we signed up for when we joined this mission. The depot we are about to attack supplies the fleets that destroyed our homes and killed our families. Today, we make them pay for every human life they have taken. Today, we show them that some costs are too high, even for victory. The attack on the Kepler depot became legend in both human and Federation military circles. Jake's ships punched through the outer defenses, using tactics that defied every principle of space warfare. Damaged vessels rammed into Federation cruisers, while their crews manually detonated their own reactors. Fighter pilots flew their ships directly into enemy gun positions, turning themselves into guided missiles that could not be stopped by defensive fire. The depot was destroyed, but the cost was exactly what Jake had predicted. 10 of his 12 ships were lost, along with most of their crews. The supplies that would have armed Federation fleets for 6 months went up in nuclear fire. But the victory came at a price that left Jake staring at casualty reports that read, like the death certificate of human civilization, back on Earth. President Kevin Walsh died when Federation bombers finally broke through the planetary defense grid and leveled New Geneva. Vice President Tony Mitchell found himself leading a species that was running out of everything: ships, supplies, colonies, and hope. Tony was different from his predecessor in one crucial way. While Kevin had been a politician who saw the war as a matter of pride, Tony was a pragmatist who understood that humanity needed to find a way to survive, rather than simply fight. "We cannot win this war through military victory," Tony told his remaining advisors during an emergency meeting in the backup government facility hidden beneath the Rocky Mountains. "But we can win it by making the cost of defeating us higher than the cost of accepting our existence. The Federation is discovering that some enemies are too expensive to eliminate completely." Dr. Amy Rodriguez had become more than just a combat mimetic. Her work treating Federation prisoners had made her Earth's leading expert on enemy psychology and morale. The reports she sent to President Mitchell painted a picture of a Federation military that was cracking under the strain of fighting an enemy that refused to behave according to the rules of civilized warfare. "The Federation soldiers are not just physically exhausted," Dr. Rodriguez wrote in her latest intelligence summary. "They are psychologically broken by fighting humans who treat death as just another tactical option." Enemy commanders are reporting desertion rates that climb higher every month. Some Federation worlds are openly refusing to send reinforcements, claiming that the war has become genocide rather than police action. Meanwhile, Pete Jackson had transformed the Vega asteroid field into something that Federation strategists called the anomaly. What had started as a mining operation had become a fortress that controlled one of the most important trade routes in the galaxy. Pete's miners had become soldiers, and their industrial equipment had become weapons that could destroy the largest Federation warships. When the Federation High Command decided that Vega had to be eliminated, regardless of cost, they sent their most powerful battle group to finish what 3 previous attacks had failed to accomplish. The force that arrived in the asteroid field was large enough to conquer entire star systems, but Pete Jackson was ready for them. "Welcome to Vega," Pete broadcast to the Federation fleet as they moved into attack position. "Population, however, many humans it takes to kill all of you." The battle for Vega lasted 8 days and became the single most expensive military defeat in Federation history. Pete's miners used asteroids as weapons, launching chunks of rock the size of cities at enemy ships using modified mining equipment. When the Federation tried to break through the asteroid field using their most advanced warships, they found themselves fighting an enemy that could hide behind planetoids and strike from directions that made no tactical sense. The psychological impact of Vega went far beyond military casualties. Federation species began to understand that humans had turned their entire civilization into a weapon. Miners fought like elite soldiers, farmers built weapons from agricultural equipment, and Scientists turned exploration technology into instruments of war. There was no safe rear area when fighting humans, no non-combatant population that could be ignored, no infrastructure that was not potentially dangerous. Admiral Lisa Campbell watched the war reports from her cell and realized that something fundamental had changed in galactic politics. The Federation had started this conflict to eliminate what they saw as a dangerous species, but they were creating something far worse, a human civilization that had learned to survive by making survival too expensive for their enemies. Fear was becoming a currency in which humans were very wealthy. Federation politicians who had voted for Exile now faced elections where their own people demanded an end to a war that was consuming their sons and daughters without producing any meaningful victories. The species that had ruled the galaxy through peaceful cooperation were discovering that peace was a luxury they could no longer afford when fighting an enemy that specialized in making war too costly to continue. Captain Morrison, now commanding his 13th ship since the war began, received intelligence that changed everything. Federation moderates were secretly reaching out to human resistance cells, looking for ways to end the conflict without admitting complete defeat. The galaxy was tired of fighting humans, but they were also afraid of what would happen if they stopped fighting and allowed humanity to recover and rebuild. As the third year of warfare drew to a close, both sides faced a terrible truth. The Federation could not defeat humanity without destroying the moral foundation of their civilization, while humans could not win the war without losing everything that made victory meaningful. Something would have to change, and both sides knew that change would reshape the galaxy in ways that no one could predict. The question was no longer who would win the war, but who would be left alive to negotiate the peace.